Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Manasi Phadke, Deputy Editor, and I am in conversation today with Sudha Bhardwaj ji, a personality who dons many hats. She is a human rights lawyer, an activist, a trade unionist, and a passionate mother. Sudha Bhardwaj was arrested for her alleged role in the Elgar Parishad that was held in Pune and the subsequent Bhima Koregaon attacks, and she spent more than 3 years behind bars. But the case is something that we can't really talk about in detail today as it is still sub judice. What we are going to focus on is a book, From Phansi Yard, which, as the title suggests, is her account of what she saw during her prison days, penned from her prison cell. So thank you, ma'am, for giving us the opportunity to talk about your book. And if you don't mind, can you, for our viewers, what was your process? How did you decide to write this book? You were, in solitary for a very long time, so you didn't really get a chance to interact with fellow inmates. How was the writing process like?
Yeah, well, actually, when I began writing, I never thought it would end up as a book. Actually, um, I am a person who, right from a very young age, has been involved in social movements.
Yes.
So first in the trade union, and then later on, the trade union made me a lawyer. So we had this group of lawyers who was doing sort of group legal aid, and then so basically, I've always been with people,
Right.
with a lot of people, and working with a lot of people. So actually, this experience of solitary was
Unnerving.
yeah, it was difficult for me, and um, but one thing which became very clear to me just in the first few days, obviously initially you're quite shocked, you feel very humiliated by many things, your dignity is affronted by many things, but when I got used to that, then I actually realized that I was much more privileged than most of the women around me. Most of them were very poor. I at least had, I had my friends, I had my daughter, I had my colleagues in the trade union, I had very good lawyers. So I knew somebody was doing something about it, and I could say, okay, well, this is a bad time. My job is to get through it, yes, and their job is to make sure I get released.
Right.
So, let's just leave it at that, and let me not, try to overthink on that. But when I saw the other women, many of them were, of course, poor, a lot of them were uneducated, some even completely illiterate. Many of them did not understand Marathi, in which all the charge sheets were there. Even I didn't. I had to struggle a lot to understand Marathi. So, uh, and many of them had, because Yerwada is a jail where you have a lot of convicts. At least half of them are convicts, and the rest of them are under trials. So a lot of them had been abandoned by their families. So nobody would come to meet them, no lawyer would come to meet them. They didn't have a clue what was going on in their cases. And I think just seeing them cope, how did they go through those difficult days, how did they look after their children, how they managed, in those overcrowded barracks, and all kinds of difficulties. And I just started observing. So through the bars, the way the Phansi Yard was, it was like a cage. So when we were let out into the corridor from our cell, we could look through the bars, and in front of the bars there would be, the ground on which women would sit and eat, and the children would play. And at the back of my cell, I could look out on the factory, which is where women went to work. So, I started observing, and then some people catch your eye, and then you look at them and you watch them, you hear their conversations, and then when you next get a chance, uh, we are waiting for mulakat, or we are going to the canteen, or we happen to be in the same van going to the court. So you strike up a conversation, and that is how gradually I'd get bits and pieces of the fragments of the conversation. It'll all fit like a jigsaw puzzle, and then I would write. So that's why it's not a diary. It doesn't have dates and times and all that.
And that's actually something that I really liked about the book is that it's scraps of some very perceptive observations, and you've not tried to make their story yours.
No. In fact, initially there was none of my story. In fact, it was more my editor, and who felt that people would be keen to know what I was doing, and that's why those italicized sections in front of, you know, the seasons.
Before you get into
That's
the,
right.
yeah.
So those were written later, actually, when I came out and when I tried to think what was I doing then, and then I wrote them.
Okay.
But actually, the notes were completely about the other women.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, something from, you know, your life in the book, your arrest came at a time when you decided to take a step back, focus
Yeah.
on yourself, focus on your daughter, and then suddenly the police come knocking at your door, and you, before you know it, you are in for 3 years. That must have been difficult.
Yes. Not as difficult as for her, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because as I said, you know, I am a person, you know, I found this with writing, for example, some way of communicating. And later on, of course, when I was in Baikala, which was about half the period, then we were in the barracks. And then I would have no time at all. I would be busy writing applications for all the other prisoners. But you know, for my daughter, it was a bad time because, you know, it was with great difficulty that we had tried to carve out a personal life.
Right.
She was on the verge of going to college when we went to Delhi, and it was a difficult time
You
for
had also taken
her.
up a stable job.
Yeah,
from
so
home
I tried to
side,
take a
yeah.
job to support her, to get
Yeah.
her through college, and you know, this happens. And then after that, there's COVID, and of course, my friends and my colleagues tried to help her a lot, but still, it's not the
different.
same. Yeah. So that was really bad.
Did
Yeah.
you think you would be in for as long as you actually were?
The good thing about me is my thing is, you know, be prepared for the worst. Hope for the best, of course, but be prepared for the worst. So I told myself, look, be prepared for 5 years. That was what I told myself when I went in.
Right.
And so I just refused to allow myself to go up and down the roller coaster, you know,
Right.
because three
At
times,
home,
three times
yeah.
bail applications were rejected, a medical bail was rejected, some other kind of merit bail was rejected. So, you know, I was quite aware that this is going to happen. And, you know, rather than agonize about it and have sleepless nights, I,
Accept it.
I just thought, let me accept it. Sometime I will come out.
And in the Phansi Yard, you shared a wall with Shoma Sen, who was also
That's right.
arrested in the same case.
Yeah.
So, you know, spending 16 to 17 hours a day with just, you know, one person, though separated by a wall, what kind of a bond does that forge?
Oh, it's something which is indescribable. Actually, all the friendships that are formed in jail, I mean, you know, friendships formed in adversity are always very strong.
Yes.
But this is different because you've been plucked away from your own, you know, from your context, and you're put there, and you just don't know who's next to you, and so on. I mean, I of course knew of Professor Shoma Sen. I'd met her a couple of times in various meetings, but I didn't know her intimately.
Right.
And I remember the very first night when, for a few days, I was kept in the hospital barrack with the other women. And then suddenly they must have realized, oh, this one has to go in there. So, or maybe they were cleaning up the cell or doing something, God knows.
Okay.
So, suddenly in the evening before the bandi, this lady marches me out, chalo, and then she literally pushes me into the cell and clang, the door shut. And I remember feeling, you know, just very shocked. And I didn't even bother to spread anything. I just lay down on the floor. And I think for the first time, I was just feeling a little weepy. And then I hear Shomadi's voice from the other side. Are you okay? Have you had any dinner? I'm sending you some dinner. So she called the constable who's in the corridor 24 by 7 and sent some dinner to me. And you know, so that was the kind of, you know, the few hours, 7 to 12, we will be outside in the corridor. Then again 3 to 5. And then in the winters, we were allowed half an hour outside the cage when everybody else had gone back into their barracks. So in the afternoon bandi. We did all kinds of things. We sang songs. We would talk about families. We would, you know, sometimes show each other even the letters we'd get. Yeah, I mean, really you become soulmates because you're really seeing the other in the most vulnerable position. I remember one night she called to me from the other side and said, you know, I'm feeling dizzy. And I was really worried. And I sent the constable also. And then I told her, just sit down, you know, don't keep standing, you might fall. So no, the that bond, that it's a different thing.
And inside prison, you have actually given a number of anecdotes, and that bring out some. I mean, it's very complex. But how did the caste, class, and religious equations manifest themselves?
They very much do. After all, I mean, the jail is just a reflection. It's like a
Yeah.
mirror of the society. So everything that is there in the outside world is definitely there. I know the way that class manifests is usually through canteen. There's something
Right.
called canteen. So you've got this regular food. In Yerwada, it was not bad. It was pretty good because there was a lot of green vegetables we would get from the fields, and there would be women cooking it. After some time, the very monotony of it starts getting to you.
Absolutely.
So actually, what people do is pep it up with canteen. So in the canteen, you get everything. You get soaps and oils and shampoos and women buy for their children diapers and this and that. And then you have a lot of snacks. So you have farsan and you have some chutneys and you
Right.
have some achar and things to spice up life. So actually, everybody needs it. So the poorer women, what they do is they usually do in the barracks, everybody gets duty.
Right.
So like two people would have the duty of sweeping and swabbing the barrack and all that. So maybe your turn will come once or twice a
Right.
month. So they do those duties, and
They do the chores for the women
yes,
who
the
can
better off
actually, yeah,
people
right.
who give them canteen in return.
Okay.
Or else if you get a special, share it with other people who are not so. So basically class shows up in the canteen.
Very drastically,
So
yeah.
it also shows up in the other ways. You have better lawyers, you can speak English, the doctors will pay better attention to you because you are more knowledgeable about your problem than a poor person is. A poor person is just saying कि दर्द हो रहा है, that's all. But
Right.
you can say, okay, you had this medicine
Right.
and you did this and so on. So class, of course, but also caste, also community. Community, in a way, the minority is the majority there, or if not a majority, a very significant section.
Okay.
Muslim women
Okay.
form a big section of women. And I found both in Yerwada and in Baikala. And they because their religion is of that nature, they pray together, they stay
Right.
together for. So in a sense, so you had the jail following all the rules for roza, and the kitchen would be opened early in the morning, 4 baje sehri aa jati thi, so all that, and then they would um, so in that sense, at least in the women's jail, it was not as if uh, they were looked down upon. In fact, they were a very strong group.
Right.
But what did come to our notice was that, in fact, that really came through sort of stories which floated down. That, for example, when there were gang wars in the Yerwada jail, many a times it would be on religious lines, and sometimes it would be the higher ups who decided who won. And that was, in a polarized atmosphere, if the administration of a jail gets polarized,
Right.
I mean, that can be really very dangerous,
Right.
very dangerous. So I remember there was one person who was beaten up very badly on his face, etc., Muslim boy. And I still recall, and it's in my book, that his Hindu girlfriend and his Muslim wife both sitting together and talking very concernedly about this young man who they probably got to see on the video conference. So yeah, and caste also, caste more in terms of, there'll be certain communities which really stand out, like the Pardhis, who are, roped in for every petty offense. I mean, any place that an offense happens, the police first go and find out the nearest Pardhi basti and pick up people. So, theirs is they are guilty unless proved innocent.
Right.
And usually there's absolutely no evidence, so they finally get acquitted. But they really have to defend themselves, stand up for themselves. Otherwise, the other people who used to be sort of looked down upon were the Bengali women who would be foreigners. Now that's an interesting thing, because you see the other foreigners who, let's say, came from Latin America or
Right.
Africa,
Right.
etc., would throw their weight around
Okay, as foreigners.
as foreigners. But these women, neither they got the advantage of being foreigners,
Right.
nor they got the advantage of not being foreigners. So so they actually were the slave labor of the jail, and they would be asked to do all the difficult things because they never had families, they never had canteen, and they would ultimately be convicted and then deported back to their country.
Right.
So all those hierarchies were
Pretty
only too
much,
visible. Yeah.
And but at the same time, you say that every woman had her own pragmatic, sense of secularism and inclusion, which also
Yeah.
showed equally.
Yeah.
So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, that is the remarkable thing. Ek to everybody celebrates all festivals.
Right.
So many Hindu women were doing roza. So many people, because the people from the church would be coming in maybe every week on Thursdays or something like that. So many of them started, purchasing Bibles and reciting the Bible. And of course, they would do puja of it the way you do puja. In their own way.
But,
yeah. But yeah, people were very secular about that. They said, कोई भी भगवान चलेगा, हमको यहाँ से निकाल दे. एंड भगवान भी बहुत सेक्युलर थे, बोलते थे कि यार क्या करो, तुम्हारी जमानत ही नहीं लगी है. So I must say that was an experience, yes. And the interesting thing is, whatever festival it might be Eid, it might be Christmas, it might be Ganpati, it might be Diwali. The only, the thing people would say heartfeltly to each other, laukar sutun za, go quickly from here, get released fast. So that is the underlying sentiment would be that.
And you have also highlighted gender discrimination, biases, etc. in the system, where you've spoken about how women prisoners were not really released easily unless they had a supposedly respectable family member coming, awaiting them, or they would be sent to the ashram.
Yeah, they would be sent to another sanstha. It is ridiculous. I mean, if a woman you consider her adult enough to be tried, even sentenced, but when she's released, you don't consider her adult enough to look after herself when she goes out. So they actually sometimes used to wait. In fact, one of the women whom I helped to get bail was a beggar woman, and she was a little mentally challenged also. Until my lawyer came and picked her up, they wouldn't release her. She was released on bail. So that and discrimination is obvious in many ways.
Right.
I mean, the way a woman is looked upon, who is a good woman, who is a bad woman, who is an immoral woman, who is the woman who would get the sympathy of the court, who is the woman who would not get the sympathy of the court. Right. So, I mean, for example, I've noticed that in most cases where a husband comes across his wife in a compromising position and maybe wreaks some violence on his wife, the courts let them off often. They think it's very natural that it is a grave, it is a circumstance which very provocative, and they feel it's quite okay. But wo betied a woman hits her abusive husband on the head, it is not considered in the same way.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And, laws like Makoka and UAPA, I mean, they need to be reviewed, but how? Because I know you've also mentioned circumstances where a woman was tried under Makoka for stealing a meager sum of, say, 6,000 rupees from somewhere. So,
yeah.
And these laws have been used increasingly in, some cases which are really questionable. So,
yeah, actually, and see, normally there are certain things, when there is a law which, let us say, is beyond the normal criminal law, then there are some safeguards which are actually built into the law. For example, sanction is one of them.
Right.
The fact that a higher officer has to give sanction. But what is the point of the sanction if the guy is going to sign without even looking at it, without looking for material, without saying what was the material that he saw before he sanctioned the case? For example, they would say that a policeman of such and such a rank only will investigate this case. Or, some things are supposed to be there which are not taken seriously.
Right.
And unfortunately, but that should be, because the stricter the law, the more stricter you have to stick to the statute. So you really should. I mean, if you want to use a law which is going to give greater punishments than the normal law, then it should also be used, very sparingly.
Absolutely.
And with proper,
Ground, I guess.
yeah, with proper ground, judiciousness. Yes.
And poor legal aid and the fact that prisons are now called correctional facilities, but the fact that there's no empathy, social sensitivity, counseling. In your 3 years of experience, how do you think all of that can be changed? What systematic recommendations would you make?
See, one thing definitely, legal aid has to be much, much improved. And you need dedicated lawyers who are accountable to the client, that is to the prisoner, not accountable to the legal services authority. The client is the prisoner.
Right.
And that means you have to go and take the trouble to meet them. You have to you have to make sure they understand the charge sheet. You have to understand their circumstances, their story. So one is legal aid, and the secondly, the prisons are short of staff. So the only staffing which they do is the disciplinary staff, which is all in Vardi, who lock you up and put you in line and scold you and etc. The reformatory staff, on the other hand, I mean, there are not enough doctors, there are not enough psychiatrists, there are not enough social workers, there are not enough teachers, and you don't give access to people who will work well with prisoners to ensure that they don't get back into crime, that they get rehabilitated. We need to pay a lot more attention to that, and that is where actually the funding should go for the prison.
And the book also talks about how Women's Day, both at Yeravada and Baikala jail, it was extraordinary in a sense that it was almost a whiff of freedom while under incarceration.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that for our viewers?
Yeah, well, yeah, so, it was something that everybody prepares a lot for. It doesn't necessarily happen on the 8th of March in Yeravada, but it happens sometimes in the month of March.
Okay.
But, 1 month before that, everybody will be very excited and some people will be selected. Usually they're the favorites who are selected, but still everybody's still excited about it because at least you get to watch people rehearsing. So they're rehearsing their skits and they're doing their dances and there's music. And even in the Bandi, you're hearing people, practice. And on that day, I mean, it's done quite professionally. They put up this pandal and they have these NGOs coming in to do makeup and all that. Exactly. So 8th March is taken very seriously. It's a different matter that not a soul speaks about women's liberation, and nobody talks about the history of 8th March or why do we do all that. But it's a chance to do something normal, to be in normal clothes, particularly for the convicts who are in green, and even the under trials, murder under trials are in green. So to wear something else, to deck up, to laugh with your friends, to get photographs. Because you can manage to get some friendly constable will be allowed. Normally they're not allowed to take their phones inside. To click these photos, and those photos will be printed and given to them. So this will be a memory. So it's and of course it usually ends with jingat. So everybody does jingat at the end of it. And the thought that these people will, actually 7 o'clock you're being locked in. Like normally it's 5:30, as late as that. So
Yeah. But it was a
quite
little
something.
different at Baikala jail.
It was because it was not. Baikala is a much smaller jail. It's a district jail. Yervada is a relatively better finance. It's a central jail.
Right.
It has a lot of convicts, so they are long term. Like some of them are going to be there for 10 years, 7 years. So it's a very different. They have to make it their home, and the jail also has to, in whatever way they can, make sure that it's a home.
Right.
In Baikala, the turnover is very brisk, so they don't bother much about all this. But so usually it's left to the prisoners to do whatever they want.
Okay.
So that was fun as well,
Yeah.
because somebody would sing. I remember Indrani Mukherjee singing beautifully in one of those meetings, and my co-accused Jyoti set up a very nice play on patriarchy, which everybody appreciated greatly. So it was that was fun, and it was very spontaneous,
Right.
unlike the Yervada thing, which was very regimented.
Right, right. you got bail in December 2021, right?
That's
so
right.
How have you kept yourself busy since then? You've been in Mumbai since then?
I've been in Mumbai since then. I can't leave Mumbai. I'm of course missing Chhattisgarh. Fortunately, for 4 months out of these 2 years, I've had my daughter with me.
Okay.
So that's been some company. But basically, I've had to sort of start my life again as a senior citizen. So, fortunately, I've been very lucky. The unions here, the lawyers here, social activists here, friends here have been very, very supportive. I'm able to do labor cases. I'm able to keep myself busy and just about keep afloat. Mumbai is an expensive city, particularly for rent. So fortunately, I have friends who have been kind enough to allow me to live in their houses. So I'm yeah, but 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 I like the city. I find it even after the mills have gone, it's a working class city.
Yes.
Everybody works for their living, and yeah.
And so, what is the status of the case right now? You also have a lot of court-related work that's going on.
Yeah. At the present stage, the charges have not yet been framed in our case, so discharge applications are pending, which have to be decided. And at the moment, it's still at the stage of what is called Section 207, which means that the accused are supposed to be given copies of all the documents that the prosecution intends to rely upon, which in our cases are our multiple devices which were seized from us. So that's not yet been done, 5 years down the line. But yeah, that's in process.
And final question before we close, since the sun is also almost down now. You were also in constant correspondence with your daughter while in prison, and you write that her letters, the tone of her letters was very angry. She was very lonely. Whereas your letters, your responses to her were full of hope, peace, and calm. Is there another book brewing there, perhaps?
Not really. I think that would be far too personal. Far too personal. No, actually, the worst thing about those letters was I would be reading it maybe 3 weeks after she's. I mean, maybe yeah. I mean, no.
There was a lag in actually getting them to
Exactly,
you,
because they would be censored in the jail, so it'll take 1 week this way, 1 week that way. So, you sometimes couldn't figure out whether that time has passed or it hasn't, and one would feel very guilty about it. But yeah, and see, my daughter, at least age-wise, was grown up. She, of course, needed me greatly and probably needed me more than a small child would need. But whenever you put a woman in jail, you're putting a family in jail.
That's true.
I mean, either those children are with them living in that jail, or they're outside yearning for the mother, or yearning for the. And yeah, it's. I think. I mean, people have to be a lot more liberal with bail. You know, why? I mean, bail should be the rule and jail should be the exception. But I found too many people there who really need not have been there at all.
And we'll end on that note. That's a good thought. Thank you so much for the candid conversation. I'm Manasi Phadke, Deputy Editor with ThePrint. Thank you for joining us.